Hey, this is Kat. Today what we're going to look at is Java data types. In programming, the idea is that we manipulate information in order to produce a result or create a game or whatever. So firstly, we need to understand the data types that Java uses and how we can manipulate these. Java has 8 primitive data types, and those fall into 4 separate categories. We have whole numbers, decimal numbers, true, false, and characters. In whole numbers, we have int, byte, short, and long. Generally, we would really only, I would really only use int in that category. In the decimal numbers, we have double and float. In this category, I would typically only use double. In true false, we've only got access to something called Boolean. And in characters, we have char. So an example of a whole number might be the number 10, the number 3, 565. Whole numbers, no decimals. Decimal numbers, so we might be dealing with a double here. We might have something like 0.3 or 5.0 or perhaps 37.338. In a Boolean, we can very literally only have true or false. And in a character, we can have any symbol, letter, number on the keyboard and have it interpreted as a text character. We have to refer to it in single quotes. So we might have the letter C, we might have an @ we might have the number 7. If we had the number 7, we could not do any mathematics with that. It is a text character, not a numeric character. Also, I want to point out that when we're referring to any of these primitive data types, they all have a lowercase letter to start. Always lowercase. Same with the Boolean variables, a lowercase letter. So when we want to actually use these data types in our programming, we first need to say what data type we want to use. So I'll use the example of an int. And then we need to give it a name. So I'm going to use answer. What this basically does is it sets up some space in memory that is prepared to hold or store an integer value. It basically creates a small box in memory and it gives that box a label. If I was then to give answer a value, so I said answer is equal to 10, it would then put that 10 in my little box in memory. Now that box needs to remember, or it will remember, that it is an integer type, so it will only contain a whole number. But the actual content in there I can change as time goes on. So the name answer is a variable name, and that means that the contents in that box can change. It is a variable value. So to then use this in a calculation, let's say we had int x was equal to 3 and int y was equal to 7. Then we might have int answer. And we could then say answer is equal to x plus y. So we know that x, the little box with x, is holding the number 3. The little box with y is holding the number 7, so it's basically the same as saying answer is 3 plus 7. But in this case here, we knew what x and y were, in the case of programming, we might have been accepting user input. So where here we could have said answer equals 3 plus 7, in the case where you're dealing with user input, you don't know straight away that they're 3 and 7. And this is why we assign those values to variables. To give you some terminology, when you say I'm going to have a variable, it's going to be called answer and it is type int, this is what we call a declaration. We declare that we will have an integer called answer. When we give that variable a value, that is called assignment. Now, where I've said int x equals 3, I have declared and assigned in one step, and that is perfectly correct. Where I've used answer, I have declared in one line, and on a separate line, I have assigned a value. That is also perfectly correct. There will be different times when one style or the other is required. Let's have a look on the computer at how we would actually program this. Alright, so let's have a look at Java data types. We're going to start by creating a new project, new Java project, and we're going to call that Java data types. Remembering no spaces in the naming. Once that project is highlighted, we're going to create a new class and we'll call this one Datatypes1. So just a quick reminder, as we set up all new programs, we're going to import java.awt.star and import java.awt.event.star. We need to tell the class that it is an applet, so extends applet. Inside the class, just check your spelling. Pretty sure that's right. Let's just see what it's saying. I imported the wrong package. So import java.applet.star. We need to put in public void init and curly braces and public void paint. Remembering that paint takes a graphics object in the brackets. Okay, so we're set up, ready to go. Now we're just going to use the example that we've just looked at and use x, y, and answer. So I'm going to declare int x equals, let's say, 10. Int y equals 4. And int answer is ready to accept an answer. Now in Paint is where I'm actually going to do my calculations. Again, for this example, we're not using init. So down in Paint, I'm going to say answer is equal to x plus y. Now if I run that, I should have no problems. I don't have any red squiggly lines, I have no errors. However, I've also got no feedback. I actually need to explicitly state that I want that information on the screen. So I need to use this graphics object here. In the last example, we were drawing things on the screen. We were drawing rectangles and ovals. In this case, we want to draw a string. So a string is text. Anything that you want on the screen exactly as you'd write it must be in double quotes. So we'll say the answer is, in my quotes, and then I want to add on the variable I want interpreted. If I'd put answer inside the quotes, then the word answer would appear on the screen, but because I want my variable answer interpreted, I have to put it outside the quotes, and I have to use the plus symbol to add that onto my string of characters. Similarly to everything else we've put on the screen, we also need to say where on the screen it is going to be. And I'll plot this little guy at 2020. So I'll run that. and see what happens. So the answer is 14. 10 plus 4 is 14. Brilliant. Okay. Now let's just quickly comment that one out and we're going to calculate a different answer. I'm going to have answer equals x divided by y. And I want to make a point here. X is a whole number. It's an int. Y is a whole number. It's an int as well. That means that we're asking how many times does y go into x? So how many 4s go into 10? It goes in twice, but there is something left over. But because we're using integers and integers are whole numbers, it will ignore the fact that there is information left over and it will chop it off. So it will tell me simply that the answer is 2. If I wanted to avoid that problem, I could change one of my variables to be a double, and then I could also change my answer to be a double. In that case, it would see this 4 as 4.0, and 10 divided by 4 would then give us a correct result with the remainder, which is 2.5. It's really important that you're aware of what type of answer you're expecting. Make sure that you use the correct data type to produce the correct answer. If you're using integers, just be very aware that depending on what kind of calculation you're doing, you may end up with an incorrect answer. Just pay close attention to that. Let's have a look at how we might use those data types and data manipulation in an actual applet. So here I've got a little applet that's set up to calculate your wages based on the number of hours that you've worked and the amount that you get paid per hour. In terms of how to set up this interface, don't worry, we'll go through that at a later date. Now we're just paying attention to how to calculate wages. So first of all, we need to think about the hours worked. Now, when I get paid for my job, I very rarely get paid in whole hours. I usually get paid also for the half hour or the quarter hour that I work. So, knowing that that's not a whole number, I know it needs to be a double. So I'm going to create a double called hours. Now I'm using the name hours because it indicates what information is being stored. Similarly, I need to store my pay rate. Dollars and cents, they're not whole numbers, they're decimals. So also I need to use a double. And because that is storing the rate that I get paid per hour, I'm going to call this variable pay rate. You always want to choose names that indicate what information is being stored. Now when I'm going to take my hours and I'm going to multiply it by my pay rate, I need to then store that in another variable. That will then store a money value, and as we just mentioned, dollars and cents, they're not whole numbers, so they must also be a double. So I'm going to call that one wages. So I have 3 variables there. Hours and pay rate are taken from the user. We just have a look here. So we're expecting the user to enter the hours that they've worked and the pay rate, and when they press calculate wages, that is when we will give this variable a value. So if we go down to paint, this is where we're doing our calculating. So wages will be equal to the hours times the pay rate. And that's brilliant. That should figure out how much we've earned for that day or that week's work. But again, we also need to give that feedback to the user. So we do that using a drawstring. And we might say you have earned, and I'll put a colon there. Now the $sign I must also put inside the double quotes because I want it to appear on the screen. Then I end my quotes. I add on the variable I want to see the value of, and I put it on the screen. Now, I've always put everything at 2020. Let's see how that works out. And my interface appears the same as before, except there's a little tidbit of a word up there. So I've placed my string where it can't be seen, so I need to move it further down the screen. So I might pop it at 120 pixels down. Just run that one again. Okay, so it's where I can see it. And it's telling me that I've earned $0.00. So let's say I worked a normal work day, 7.5 hours, and let's say I earn $8 an hour. Let's calculate those wages, and I would have earned $60. Let's say, for example, I got $12.50 an hour. I would have earned $93.75. So it takes the number from the first box and it assigns that to the variable hours. It takes the number from the second box and it assigns that one to the variable pay rate. Wages is then this number multiplied by this number, and in our case we've then output that to the screen. So that is a basic example of numeric calculations using primitive data types in Java.